Today we're going to start a new topic. We're going to be working with integers. Now you may think you don't know what integers are, but you actually do. You've been working with them a long time. Integers are positive and negative whole numbers. So when you were in kindergarten, or really even probably preschool or earlier, and you started counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so forth and so on, you were counting integers because integers are whole numbers. The difference is you didn't count with the negatives. So the numbers you were counting were positives. We don't necessarily call them positive, but that is what they were. They were positive numbers. So starting from 0, if we count up on a number line, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so forth and so on. Those are all positives because they're above 0, and we can put the positive symbol there if we want to, but we don't have to. The ones below 0 are our negatives, and we're counting backward. So the first number in front of 0 rather, should be negative 1. We do have to put the negative symbol with it. And what it means is it is 1 below 0. And then we have negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, and negative 5. Now, if you notice, 0 is neither positive nor negative. It's sort of like the wall between the positives and the negatives. It's neutral. It's in between the two. And we use negatives, actually, we use integers all the time, but since we're adding negative integers to the mix today, I want to talk about that for a minute. There are lots of places that we use negatives. We use negatives in sports. We use negatives with money. We use negatives with elevation. We use it with temperature. We use it a lot of different ways. And so I want to take a moment to talk about some of the words that could indicate that a situation has a negative. So take a moment and make sure to copy all these down. We can pause while you copy. So all of these words are negative words. So for example, if I say that the temperature outside decreased by 10 degrees, that meant it went down 10 degrees. One word up there that you may not know is the word withdraw. To withdraw means to take money out or to take something out. Specifically, when talking about numbers, we're usually talking about a bank account or something like that. So when you take money out of the bank, that's called a withdrawal. And that's a negative because the amount of money you have in the bank is going down. So if you take $50 out of the bank, that's a negative $50. There are also words that indicate that a situation is positive. Here are your positive words. Take a moment and copy those down, read over, make sure you know what they mean. Now, one of the words on there that you may not know is the word deposit. A deposit is the opposite, basically, of a withdrawal. And we can remember that deposit is positive because it has posit, like in positive. Deposit is when you put money or you put something in. Usually we talk about it being money that we put in the bank or, for example, in the cafeteria, when you put money in your account, that is a deposit that you have made into your account. And when we look at situations, again, we see this a lot of places. So let's look at some situations and see if we can pick out the keywords. So if I make a withdrawal of $50, as I said, we're going to say that that's a negative $50. So we would write it negative $50. We do need to use the unit there. 20 degrees below 0, that could be a temperature of negative 20 degrees. The word below is our keyword that tells us that it was a negative. 7 feet above sea level is going to be a positive 7 feet. We can put the positive symbol there if we want to, but we don't have to. That means that wherever we're at, we're 7 feet above what sea level would be, or 7 feet higher than sea level. So in that situation, 0 means sea level. A decrease of 39 points. Decrease of 39 points. The word decrease means goes down, so that's going to be a negative 39 points. That could be something like the stock market or something like that we talk about points, or if you're playing a game and you have a 39-point penalty or something like that, then that would be a negative 39. A loss of 5 yards. If you're playing football, for example, and your team loses 5 yards, then that's going to be a negative 5 yards. The negative tells us, or the word loss rather, tells us that it's a negative. Now, in that situation, 0 means whatever we started at, wherever we started. So a loss of 5 yards means 5 yards behind where we started. So where we started would be the meaning of 0. Does that mean we started on the 0-yard line? No, it just means that's where we started. It's wherever we started. So 0 in any situation basically means what you're counting above or below. So it's going to be your starting point. In temperature, that's always generally going to, that's pretty much going to be 0. We're counting above or below 0. Sea level, pretty much the same thing. We're counting above or below sea level. But a lot of other things, it can be other meanings. For example, in the withdrawal of $50, that's negative 50, and that negative 50 is in relation to whatever our account balance was to begin with. Now it's $50 lower than where we started. So 0 in that situation means whatever amount of money we started with. So for example, if we started with $200, that's 0 in this situation because now our account balance is 50 below 200. So that negative 50 is in relation to whatever we started at, and that's what the 0 stands for. Now, a deposit of $150 is the opposite of a withdrawal. In this case, so it's $150, so it's positive $150, or $150 higher than whatever we started with. Now, some other vocabulary that we need to know when we talk about integers. We need to know about opposite integers. Opposite integers are the same distance from 0, but in opposite directions. So think about it almost like the idea of a line of symmetry. 0 is in the middle, and if we folded the number line on top of itself, opposite integers would be on top of each other. So for example, the opposite of positive 3 is negative 3, because positive 3 is 3 above 0, and negative 3 is its mirror image. It's 3 below 0. The opposite of negative 2 is positive 2, because negative 2 is 2 below 0, and positive 2 is 2 above 0. So they're opposites. Negative 6 and positive 6 would be opposites. Negative 6 would be 6 below 0, and positive 6 would be 6 above 0. So negative 6 and positive 6 are opposites. And last but not least, positive 10 and negative 10. Now, I'm not going to draw it on here because my number line doesn't go quite that far, but positive 10 and negative 10 are opposites because positive 10 would be 10 above 0, negative 10 would be 10 below 0. The opposite of 0 is 0. 0 is its own opposite because if we fold the number line, then it's going to fold right there on top of itself. Now, something that sounds a little odd, but that we do need to know is that the opposite of a number is the number. Now, again, that sounds a little weird, but let's think about what that's saying for a minute. The opposite of a number. Basically, what that's saying is if I have the opposite, think about negatives meaning the opposite, so not. The opposite of 4, for example, or the opposite of 4 would mean negative 4. So that would be 4. The opposite of negative 4, that's what this is saying. The opposite of negative 4 is 4. So we think of it as opposite of opposite because negatives, we think of that kind of the opposite symbol, so to speak, I guess. So when we think about the opposite of a number, it is the number. So the opposite of 4 is 4. Another way to think about that, in language arts, sometimes you talk about double negatives. For example, if I say, well, I'm not lying, what does that mean? Yeah, it means I'm lying. So the opposite of the opposite is the number. So the opposite of 4 is 4. Or another way to think of it is the opposite of negative 4. The opposite of the opposite is 4. So the opposite of 4, the opposite of positive 4 would be negative 4. Because, whoops, actually we can't say it that way because really the best way to think of this is we're doing a negative number is essentially what we're thinking of. So the opposite of negative 5, for example, would be 5 because, again, the opposite of something. Not, a double negative, just like in language arts. So not 5 means 5. All right, now moving on from that, the next thing we're going to talk about that we don't want to confuse with opposites, but people sometimes do, is the idea of absolute value. Now, absolute value means how far you are away from zero, the distance from zero. It's always written without a sign, and we generally use it when we care about the magnitude or size of a number. For example, if we want to know how far apart two numbers are. We don't really care which one's bigger, which one's smaller, but we want to know how far apart they are. So, for example, first of all, we need to know that those parallel lines, by the way, those are the absolute value signs. So when you see those parallel lines like that with the -3 in the middle, what that's really saying is what is the absolute value of -3? Or in other words, how far is -3 from 0? So for example, here's 0, here's -3. How far is -3 from 0? It's 3 away from 0. Now, for the absolute value of 5, here's 5. How far is 5 away from 0? It's 5 away from 0. -5, here's -5. How far is -5 away from 0? It is also 5 away from 0. So notice I didn't ask you, was it 5 above 0 or was it 5 below 0? Just simply how far from 0. So that's what absolute value is talking about. How far from 0. And again, we use that generally when we're caring about things like how far apart two numbers are. So an example of that, or a situation where you might use that, is something like this. So give that a try and see what you can do with it. Pause while you do that, and then when you're done, hit play, and you can check and see if what you did made sense. So if I were going to do this, I would say, well, the record low temperature in January was -3 degrees. So I would look at a number line. I'm going to draw it vertically this time because when I'm thinking about temperature, that makes more sense to me. So here's my -3, and that's the temperature in January. In February, it was 6 degrees. So that means it's going to be 6 above 0. So it's going to be right here in February. And the question says, what is the difference in the temperatures? Explain how you know, either in words or pictures. So I'm explaining it in pictures. Now when I look at this, how far apart are they? Well, from 6 to 0 is 6, and from 0 to -3 is 3. Essentially what I did there is I'm adding the absolute value of 6 plus the absolute value of -3. So the absolute value of 6 is 6. The absolute value of -3 is 3. So when I add that, they are 9 degrees apart. So the answer to that would be 9 degrees. Now, I'm not saying it was 9 degrees colder in January or it was 9 degrees warmer in February. It didn't ask me that. It simply said, what is the difference? The difference is 9 degrees. I don't care about saying higher or lower or whatnot. I just want to know what's the difference. And so that's kind of an example of where we might use absolute values. Now, moving on from that, another thing we need to do is we need to talk about comparing and ordering integers. Now, when you think about comparing and ordering integers, I want you to remember thinking about where numbers are on the number line. We know as we count up from 0, we get larger numbers. So that means as we go to the right, we get larger numbers. And as we go to the left, numbers get smaller. So when you think about that, that means that when we think about it, when we compare, for example, -2 and -1, that means -2 is less than -1 because it's further to the left. And -1 is greater than -2 because it's further to the right. And you may think, that sounds really weird because 2 is more than 1, so how can -2 be less than -1? Well, remember, negatives are the opposite of positives. So putting negatives in order is the opposite of putting positives in order. So if I look at this first set of numbers up here that I want to put in order, I've got +2, -3, -5, 0, and 4. And I want to put them in order from least to greatest. It's important to pay attention to which order we want to go in. So when I look at that, I'm going to think about where those numbers are on my number line. Here's +2, -3, -5, 0, and 4. So if I want to put them in order from least to greatest, the farthest left is going to be my lowest number. So it's going to be -5, then -3, then 0, then 2, then 4. Take a moment, pause, try the next one, and see what you get, and then we'll talk about it. Hit play when you're ready. All right, for the next one, if you think about your number lines, we're going greatest to least, which means that our positives are going to come first. Well, my positives were the 2, the 2, and the 7, which is going to be up here somewhere. So 2 and 7 are my two positives. I've also got a 0, and I've got some negatives in there. I've got a -3, a -2, and a -5. So if I want to go from greatest to least, I've got to go this time from the right side of my number line to the left side. So 7 and 2 are my two positives. They're going to be the bigger numbers. And then 0 is in the middle of the positives and the negatives. And then I got to go through my negative numbers. So -2, then -3, then -5 is going to be in order from greatest to least. Now thinking about this statement for a minute, how can you complete this statement? All negative numbers are what? All positive numbers. If you think about the number line, you would have to say all negative numbers are less than all positive numbers, because all negative numbers are to the left of all positive numbers. So it doesn't matter how big the negative might sound. For example, -1,472,863, for example, because it's negative, is less than any positive number, even +1, for example. So all negative numbers are less than all positive numbers. Take a moment and try these sets of numbers and see if you can put them in order. Let's try these two sets of numbers and see if you can put them in order. And when you're done, pause for a moment and we'll check and see if you're correct. All right, if you've done them correctly, this should be the order that you have them in. And if you've not done them correctly, then think about drawing a number line, look at where each of the numbers are, and that should help you to figure out what order they should go in.